Today is the 6th day of the July 94 7-day retreat in Springwater. A hot day, even though tens of degrees cooler than other places. Some places in Arizona, I heard the temperature has reached 128. California in the desert. So how to keep cool? In ancient days, so one sees in movies about ancient days, when there was no electricity or air conditioning, fans like this, there were slaves doing this. One wonders how they must have felt. Did they get part of this air moving? Are you getting part of the air moving? I hope so. A few questions left over, which we will go into this morning. One is about choice. It comes up inevitably all the time. We are accustomed to speak of our choosing, and we are fond as well as habituated to thinking that we have free choice. So can we look at choice this moment? Another question is, what is wisdom? You talk about wisdom. It slips in here and there. What do you mean by it? And also the question has cropped up repeatedly. Why sit quietly? Particularly in a room like this. Or more generally, any time. Often people observe and remark, I can be very peaceful and observant while walking in the woods. But have a hard time sitting quietly. And what's this thing about sitting quietly anyways? Is it just a ritual? One person who came to retreat after not having been to retreat for quite a long time said, what a wonderful thing to have learned to sit quietly. I had such a hard time in the beginning, this person said. And I didn't even notice how restless the body-mind were. Didn't even notice myself moving about. Most of us, or all of us who come here, want peace and quiet. And usually, because of our training, we have learned to look for these things on the outside. Everything that good that will come to us will be some place to be found on the outside, in a situation, in a condition, in a place, in a teacher, in a relationship, in the dream house, in having enough money. Someplace in the future I will have my peace and quiet, says the restless mind, and going restlessly about to attain restlessness, restfulness, which is in itself an absurdity, an impossibility. The restless mind cannot find rest. It can have only ideas about restfulness and pursue those ideas restlessly. So before pursuing or finding rest, can one be aware of the restless mind and body. If one is interested, no one is forcing us. Everyone comes here by free choice. Is that how we come here? So what is offered is a room which is maintained inside and around it, underneath it and on top of it, with relative quiet. We find how impossible it is to have a totally quiet place. Things always happen, and it's very hot and one needs an extra fan, or one needs to change the hot water heater, and unbeknownst to oneself it has a racketeering fan. Not racketeering, makes a racket. Footsteps are heard, the shower is heard underneath. Kitchen sounds. The crows we don't mind. If it was a bunch of people, that raucous, we would object. But we have associations and love for birdsong, for crows. There's a hauntingness about it. Although the question always remains, can we hear, or can there be hearing without association, without bringing the memory to bear with its likes and dislikes? Because the sounds we ourselves make, some people breathe heavier or noisier due to sinus or other conditions than other people. And we do sit here together, and we also first have to learn to sit quietly. We're not aware, as one person pointed out, we're not aware of the sounds we make until a sensitivity sets in which we can hear ourselves. Not just the thoughts and emotions, but also the sound of this whole body. Not just the heartbeat and breathing. One may suddenly find that one has scratched oneself, and if it's noticed immediately, there is also a realization that at this moment there was inattention or a change of trains of thought. With a change of trains of thought, there is usually or often connected a physical movement. And by discovering or noticing the physical movement, one may also notice the change of thoughts, or the thoughts that are running and that were running. One becomes more aware, more light unto oneself in sitting quietly and observing what is happening without judgment, which is about the heaviest movement that thought produces. Judging, condemning, blaming, finding fault with ourselves and each other, which is the peltering under which we grow up as children, being constantly pelted by, don't do this, this was bad, this is good. Do this like this, don't do it this way. This is the better way. No, not this way. This is how we grow up. If you have your own children, this is what comes out of your mouth all the time. If you see others, you think, oh my God, how can they survive it? Constantly being corrected, constantly being at fault over something, which becomes ingrained as a program, which after a while needs no parents to repeat this, although parents keep repeating it. The child has already heard it and is either rebellious against it or is told on top of what he already has learned not to do, which becomes particularly humiliating or frustrating to a child, to be told not to do something what one wasn't even about to do, because we're also admonished ahead of time and afterwards. So, judgment of ourselves sits so deep, is so deeply programmed, because it came almost with a mother's milk, certainly with mother and father's approval or disapproval, which is needed for the infant and toddler and little child for survival. It cannot survive healthily without love and approval, and it suffers sorely with disapproval and blame and fault-finding. And of course, by some inbuilt mechanism, the child learns to direct it outwardly and blame others. Blame the younger siblings in the same way that he or she has been blamed or is being blamed by the parents. Same inflection of voice, same words, talking to little sister. And then the mother saying, don't blame her. She's just a little girl. She doesn't know any better. Confusing. I've watched this with our grandchildren. Very confusing, irritating, and often the irritation and confusion and anger has to be swallowed, because if one becomes angry, one gets blamed or punished for it. So all of these programs are deeply conditioned and running. That's why it is so difficult to see anything, or particularly anybody, without judging him, her. Because with the growing up the way we do, the fact that we are helpless, totally in need of assistance and totally dependent on adult care, and by being able to think about our condition verbally, pictorially, a deep-seated feeling of inferiority is also ingrained. Most human beings, maybe all, at heart or at the bottom, in the guts somewhere, feel inferior. And make up for this, we make up for it constantly by trying to prove ourselves superior in many different avenues, trying to achieve, attain in school and sports, but also putting other people down, judging them as worse or not good, or whichever way we can observe it here. People tell me all the time how they're finding they're judging others without even knowing them, just through projection. And this judging of others gives a temporary feeling of being somebody superior to the one who is like that, because we can judge him, we know better, which alleviates the pain of inferiority, which is there in an annoying, murky way, and can be discovered by sitting quietly and watching judgment, what it does. how it wants to fill a void, an inner void, and still can't do it. So, I'm often told, why do you always mention negative things about us? Say something nice. I'm not saying this to point out how negative we are, but how we are. This is how we are. And to see that without judgment, there's joy in discovery. Joy and energy in discovering the truth of this moment, of just having judged someone and feeling superior and seeing it. Not just thinking about it, but seeing it, discovering it. Insight into this moment of happening. How it all goes together. This leads to that. The connection is seen clearly. And seeing clearly is joy and energy, which brings a sense of well-being, unless what usually happens, we get so caught up in what we see that we were judging others again and again. And when will we ever stop judging other people? We've heard it often enough, we shouldn't judge, although nobody says that. So if we get caught in what is seen in this wise, we will not be wise. If we see what we're doing, then wisdom is born. Seeing that judgment comes instantly and is a habit, deeply ingrained program, which has its byproducts of feeling a little bit superior very temporarily. If there is really watching attentively, not just cutting it off the moment something is discovered, and woe me, that kind of train of thought. But keeping watching, regardless of what it is that is revealed, we will see that the satisfaction from judging, or the dissatisfaction, lasts very briefly only. These are all very temporary states of body-mind, which have no continuity unless thought feeds the fuel by thinking more about it in more judgmental terms. To discover that, the temporariness of our states of mind, as well as what continues them, what gives them sustenance and fuel, the storyline as we have called it, to discover that is an unfolding of wisdom. Which does not say right or wrong, it says, this is the way it is. Someone told me this morning, have ups and downs, get feeling maybe depressed or elated, but it doesn't seem to stick very long. Comes and goes much faster. Maybe there's not so much elaboration of it. That's an unfolding wisdom about this human organism, mind organism. And discovery of the kind that was just given as an example is not confined to sitting quietly in a sitting room during a retreat, but having done this kind of work since for almost 30 years, 3 years missing, with people, not alone, not off in a cave, but in communication, close communication with fellow human beings. The quiet sitting, having brief periods during the day if there's time, if one can find the time, and if one can remember it, we forget about it. That's the problem. Having quiet periods during the day, or a quiet period, and also having longer periods of quiet being, walking as well as sitting, alone as well as together. Seems to do something about being more aware of what we are all about from moment to moment. Discovering about ourselves and also learning not to take it so personally, maybe not to take it personally at all. There's another wisdom that is evolving. Taking it personal means defensiveness or blindness, not wanting to look because I don't want to be this way, or I am not this way, and denying it or defending or avoiding to look deeper for fear of finding out we are not what we have imagined to be. But that itself can be seen, the comparing to imagery about ourselves, which brings the pain of discovery. Immediately thought and image saying, no, this is not what I am, I don't want to see that. But that itself can come into awareness. And then one might even smile at oneself for holding on to imagery and wonder whether this is all one is. Imagery? This is what we have believed. Not that we believe we're an image, but we believe the image is the truth about ourselves. Which it is not. It is a product of thought and memory and hearing what people say about us and projection, all capacities of this huge brain that evolved suddenly, slowly and suddenly, with human beings, not with the beginning ones, but then suddenly there was a larger brain capacity. Suddenly, in terms of millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years, which allows fantasy, art, painting of caves, but also remembering what he or she did and what I am and you are not. My tribe versus yours. My secret society versus the outsider. So, discovering about ourselves in quiet sitting can be happening in quiet working in the kitchen. Maybe one gets a note and gets irritated at somebody else, the way he or she is doing it. Why doesn't he or she do it my way? Not give me more space. All of this can be pondered and watched right then and there, but it's not so easy if one is about to use a kitchen machine or cut vegetables or whatever all one is doing. But in sitting quietly and having nothing to do, the event may come up again and can be looked at as a memory. We can look at memory very intelligently. What was it that got me so excited, so upset, so angry, or so happy? Although memory is not as reliable as watching directly, but watching directly is also not very reliable if we're attached to imagery about ourselves and others and don't see each other as we are. So now you can say, or one can say, is that all what that quiet sitting is about, to become aware of our conditioning? had thought there would be much more to it than that. First of all, is one really aware of conditioning? By really aware, I mean not taking a self-centered position in the watching. Watching without self-centered position taking, which means no judgment. The openness of listening, looking, experiencing. Then conditioning is seen very clearly, very intelligently, and may not be sustained because it's clear that thinking more in emotional terms and loaded words and thoughts about what happened sustains. What is agitating the body-mind. And with agitation or restlessness dissolving in quiet watching, agitation abating in quiet watching, the listening and being here ever more quiet, not to hear something, but not to do something, to take a position, not to know anything. Maybe in this increasing, ever more quieting, there will be the discovery that inner quiet is not separate from outer quiet. Because there is nothing separating inside from outside. It is one palpitating whole. Fragmented and separated through thoughts about me, mine, you, yours, taking imagery for the truth, projections for real. Projections being that we're all separate, that I'm this, I'm a woman. You could say, well, wait a minute, you are a woman. Yes, but I don't have to insist upon it or attach to it or make a thing out of it. In the beginning, when I started giving talks, holding meetings in a mostly male Zen center. There were women there, but maybe 6% were women. Less. People who liked the talks would say, it's so nice to hear a woman. Or you talk as a woman. I always refuse to enter into this. Not out of denial. I cannot and will not and need not deny it. I'm a woman. But I don't want this work to be fragmented or categorized or labeled in any way. Because it does not need that. It is free from that. Looking, discovering. Because I know I will get responses. One is different as a woman and more this or that. Statistics have showed it. I don't know, statistics often are biased too. I've known women who are very hard, harsh, unfeeling, and men who are very soft, very feeling, empathetic. can't draw a line, even though admittedly we're brought up differently, with different ideas, different concepts, categories, and presumptions and assumptions, which have conditioned us. That was the first thing that fascinated me when I took an anthropology course at school. So much so that I took more and more and more and more. It was more interesting to me even than psychology. It's anthropology, to see how relative our values are, how relative our occupations are, to learn about peoples where the women do all the work and the man moves into her house and does pretty much nothing. She bears the children, she takes care of the economics, she makes the decisions. To learn about this sort of resolved this whole problem for me. To see that it was conditioned, culturally conditioned, not inherent. And what is conditioned maybe can also be unconditioned. There was a sense of freedom in these discoveries into what all is possible as invention of human society, and was what was taken for so solid, the patriarchal thing, the Father God, the Son God, was just very specific to one region. Had so many varieties of other forms, other images, other beliefs. So we had come to a quietness and it happens maybe from own experience. I haven't tested it thoroughly. It is when in sitting motionlessly quiet that there is this depth of wholeness, oneness, no separation, with its love and wisdom, bare of the personal. The personal viewpoint does not survive in that. It is a different thinking, emoting circuit, which in this quiet wholeness and openness is as if unplugged. That fan does not revolve right now. But one can see that our ways of thinking and divisive thinking imposes the borderlines, the divisions, the caste lines, the class lines, the tribal and ethnic and religious divisions, divisions between male and female. Apart from their natural differences, which may still be small in comparison to what is the same in both organisms. Being born helpless and totally conditionable by the culture and the ideas of the parents and the society, the culture, the history. So to the question, what is wisdom? Wisdom is having insight into this and not needing to renounce prejudice, but prejudice cannot survive in such a seeing when that is operating, when that is there. Then the absence of prejudice may be called wisdom, or seeing the origins of prejudice is also wisdom. Seeing what perpetuates it, and maybe abstaining from what perpetuates it. if there is clarity of seeing at that moment, of just about perpetuating it. If there's no attention and awareness, the habit is to perpetuate. Because we gain some temporary, slight feelings of security by moving in habits. And if our habits are questioned or rattled or interrupted, there is frustration or a reaction of being interrupted in something that's comforting and security-giving. Maybe frightened. That's why a lot of quiet sitting, particularly in the beginning, brings fearful states of being at a loss and seeing habit, and or what am I going to do without it, or how will I be if this all stops, and the speculating mind going to work restlessly, imagining things that arouse more fear. Having insight into that is wisdom. Seeing how an interrupted habit arouses fear. And questioning whether there's anything truly dangerous about it. Not going with the assumption that there's danger now because the body manifests fear. The habit has been interrupted. Habit of thinking in certain ways, thinking of myself as an individuality. As a man, as a woman, as a German or Christian. So as one person asked, is there no end of finding out these its and bits of conditioning? It seems so endless. There's always something more. There is. It's endless. Probably infinite, our conditioning. Because there's always new stuff added. Come conditioned so easily, so quickly. So discovering habit, conditioned habit, ways of thinking, ways of judging, ways of imagining and projecting takes as long as our life. Because there's always something there to see. Always, maybe not. The mind can also quiet down. Sometimes by quite assiduously watching, which as many people have agreed here is exhausting. It's exhausting to keep watching. Because until it is effortless, it is an effort. It's as simple as that. When it's effortless, then it's effortless. But if it's not effortless, then we make an effort to be aware. And then suddenly, here it is effortless to watch. And then it is not so exhausting because things appear in awareness without being fussed over, made a thing of, gripped and grasped, but let go. Because the energy is here and now with this incredibly wonderful fan, evaporating moisture by the gallon. Which was a false statement. It's not by the gallon, just a way of speaking. I remember years ago, the house was very unfinished. A friend came from Germany to do a retreat here. Came from a big city. I don't think he'd ever lived in the country. first he wondered how a retreat could take place in such an unfinished place. But so he took lots of walks, and he was absolutely smitten with walking through woods and fields and seeing empty hills across, so sparsely populated. Such wonderful flowers and animals and such fresh air. He walked for hours every day. And when he came to a meeting, he said, "Why do people sit in this room when they have hundreds of acres?" And he walked down the village and on the street to another village. "Why sit in this room?" I said, "The only answer can be given by yourself. Try it out."
And he did. He still sat at one of those windows. And then in one of the meetings he says, "I know the difference now. There's a difference." He spent quite a bit of time in the sitting room and quite a bit of time walking, did both. There's even a difference whether one looks out or doesn't look out.
Obviously,
Looking out at the
landscape,
light, dark, all of this
input. Because we talk about not closing the eyes completely because it often induces sleepy, trancy states, but it's not the same looking at the same floor, not in focus, doesn't have to be focused, then looking at the landscape.
It is beautiful.
It has a place for everything.
Just to find out for oneself all that is possible for a human being like you and me. And not many minutes left. We haven't really tackled choice yet. But maybe that from all the foregoing it will be simple and easy.
We make decisions all the time. We have to decide what fruit to buy, whether oranges or peaches or both. How to spend our money, the budget. What clothes to buy, what colors. What career to enter into or to change into. Most people here are already doing things. But after a while, whatever one is doing, most of the time becomes boring or drudgery, and the restless mind seeks for something new to do, something better, more interesting, more lovable. So what new occupation to choose, what new place to choose to move to, what partner to choose to be with, or whether to leave the partner, the spouse, whether to have children, what to do with the children when one has them. Always decisions, choices seem to just be the barrage of the day. Why is it such a problem? Is it that there are so many options and the brain can peruse these options, it can sort of scan them, go over them, imagine this and imagine that and that and that. So that's one thing, lots of options. The other thing is lots of different desires, which are many of them in conflict, in direct conflict with each other. We want rest, we also want excitement. We want to live alone and we also want to live together. We want to live in the country, but we also want to live in the city. We want to save our money, but we also love to spend our money. And I could spend a whole day, a whole 10-day retreat talking about our options and our conflicting desires. We want to be free of desire, but we desire to be, well, you name it, what we all desire to be, and yet we want to be free from agitation. We want satisfaction, but the satisfaction that we may get is so fleeting, so temporary. So we have to choose a new satisfaction. So in all of this, what was mentioned, there is me in the center of the spectrum. Me with my likes, my desires, my fears, my past experiences, driving me, my habits. Which are in conflict with each other, at least partly. So who is the chooser? How is the choice made? There's I don't know whether there's any research on this, but there must be a mechanism in the brain that scans this and then weighs it, for the time being, says this is more satisfactory and has more advantages and fewer disadvantages than something else. At least so it looks for the time being, because tomorrow it already looks different again. And on that basis, a decision is made. Which very often, the moment we've made a decision and have bought the thing or done the thing, then the mind says, oh, what if I had only done the other? And if one had done the other, one would think, why didn't I do the first? This is the restless mind, to be observed carefully without being judged. So some intelligence can unfold about it. So, is there ever a moment in which the self-center is absent? We've talked about it here and there all through the retreat. And maybe at times it was right there and talking and listening. Just being here. Not needing to refer to anything about myself, that circuit in peace, in abeyance. Then what choice is there to make? What decision is there to make? It doesn't matter. Often the total situation in such a state, the total situation brings up the thing to do. The brain is, of course, involved with it, but it doesn't have that self-center to pull at the magnet, like the North Pole. So the whole situation can be surveyed as good as possible, as much as facts are available, and we can never know all, usually very little. But the total situation suggests itself what needs to be done in oneself, with one's needs and fears and so on, is part of that total situation, but not at the center of it, drawing like a magnet all the attention or inattention to it. So when we get together to make a decision, Are we there, or each one of us representing our district, like in Congress? Not just our district, but also I want to be re-elected. I want to continue. Then how can an intelligent decision be made that takes into account what is needed to be done? Maybe it's very hard to come up with an intelligent decision, but it'll be easier if we don't represent any specifics, but are there with the whole. Because we each are the whole. Each member of each district is also the total country. And not just the whole country, but the whole world. We haven't learned to think in those terms yet. So, when we get together, can we wonder about this now that we're talking about it and thinking about it and looking at it? Am I right now representing my point of view? I want my way. I'm invested in it. Maybe only because I've said an opinion, I'm already invested now. I can't take it back, or else I would lose my reputation of being consistent. So can we listen to each other? Hear each other out. What our different needs are, what each one brings as information to the whole. And how clear are we in presenting information? Are we really clear about our vested interests? That's to be discovered in quiet sitting, or walking, or interacting with some openness to what's investment. And maybe when we come together and listen to each other, some decision can emerge, which there's not really a chooser. It appears to be the right thing to do at this point in time. And we'll see how it works out. How quietly can we listen to ourselves and each other? And the plane overhead and the fan moving.
We will end here for today.